Welcome. This is the first video of an educational series for beginning winemakers that is structured mainly around how to make wines from kits, but there is instruction and theory beyond basic kit making. Guidance and instruction is provided to improve the quality and elaborate upon the basic instructions in the kits. Now, this is not an intermediate winemaking course, so some of the more in-depth descriptions of various products and winemaking concepts are omitted to keep the information at more of a beginner level. Each lesson will consist of a lecture video and a separate practical video conducted in a winemaking area. In addition to the lecture videos and the practical videos for each lesson, there will be short videos provided that take you through each day of the fermentation process. The whole course is packaged into a YouTube playlist, and there will be links at the end of each video to take you to this playlist so that you'll have easy access to the complete course series that is in chronologically organized order from the first video to the last video. Now, we apologize in advance for the repetitive promo at the end of each video, but without access to the whole playlist, you may miss out on important lessons if you happen to come across a video in the middle of the course. In the description at the bottom of each video, there are links to our organizations, links to technical information, and a link to a Google Drive folder that will contain documents, forms, graphs, and technical procedures that you can download for your personal use. This course was sanctioned by the BC Artisanal Winemakers Association, BCAWA, also known as BACAWA, and was created by Rick Homer, Sean Kien, and Trevor Curtis, who are all members of the Saanich Sommeliers Winemaking Club. Between the three of them, they have over 45 years of winemaking experience. They have won countless medals in winemaking competitions and have been awarded Winemaker of the Year either at the provincial or national level. In addition to their winemaking skills, they are all accomplished wine judges with the BC Guild of Wine Judges. BACAWA is the umbrella organization for artisanal winemaking clubs in British Columbia, Canada. BACAWA coordinates various club competitions, seminars, training sessions, and also sponsors a BC provincial winemaking competition each year. A link to this organization is in the description below. The course was designed to introduce you to fundamental winemaking techniques, enabling you to immediately apply elevated techniques to making wine from kits. You will be guided through the process and are encouraged to follow along at home with your own winemaking equipment and a kit. This course will teach you the art and science of making wine from kits. We will teach you how to take the kits to the next level through various yeast selections and various techniques and procedures that are beyond the typical kit instructions. The kit instructions are designed to make the wine within the published timelines of the kit, whether that's a 4-week kit, a 6-week kit, or an 8-week kit. Now, while these instructions will in fact produce a decent wine, there are steps that can be taken to improve the quality of the wine that you make. Some of the steps that are introduced may involve deviating from the kit instruction, adding additional ingredients, and lengthening the time between the recommended kit timeline. Before we start talking about how to make an elevated kit wine, it is important that you have a basic understanding of how wine is made from grapes. This knowledge will improve your understanding of winemaking in general. Don't worry if you find some of this information to be a bit overwhelming, because we will be covering a lot of the winemaking concepts in greater detail throughout the course. In Lesson 2, we will be talking specifically about wine kits, where we will take you through the process of starting a wine kit. Making wine from grapes requires more equipment than making wine from kits. However, all of the equipment used for winemaking can also be used for grape winemaking. It is absolutely necessary to ensure that anything that comes into contact with the juice or fruit of a wine is clean and sanitized. Did I mention sanitized? Most winemaking problems can be traced back to improper cleanliness. To make a quality wine, you must start with quality grapes. This is just as true for kit-based wines as it is for grape-based wines. This should come as no surprise because the kits are also made from grapes. Grapes must reach a precise level of ripeness to ensure the proper balance of sugars and acidity for the intended wine style. The optimum window for picking grapes is generally only a few days long. The first piece of equipment that grapes come into contact with is the crusher destemmer. This device gently crushes the grapes with a roller mechanism, and then a spinning paddle assembly separates the stalks from the grapes. The stalks exit from one end, and the crushed grapes fall into a container below. From here, they are moved into a primary fermenter. A quality crusher destemmer will have all parts that contact the grapes made out of stainless steel. Small home versions may be manually powered, but most are powered by electric motors. Commercial versions do the same thing, but just on a larger scale. In some instances, a winemaker may ferment the whole clusters of grapes without employing the process of crushing or destemming. This is referred to as carbonic maceration. The primary fermenter is a container where the initial fermentation is done. These vary from a plastic food-grade bucket that we will be using to the large glycol coolant stainless steel tanks that the commercial wineries use. When grapes are crushed, the resulting mixture of juice, pulp, skins, and seeds is referred to as the must. Once fermented and pressed, it is referred to as wine. A hydrometer is used to check for sugar content. A pH meter measures the strength of the acid, and an acid test kit can be used to check for total titratable acidity, also known as TTA. Additional tests may be required when making wine from grapes. Prior to fermentation, additives such as yeast nutrients, tannins, enzymes, and sulfite, which is SO2, may be required. However, when making wine from kits, the manufacturer has already balanced the juice prior to packaging, eliminating the need for most of these tests. The key difference between red and white wines happens at this point. White grapes proceed directly to the pressing stage and are fermented without the skins or seeds. In some cases, the winemaker may choose to allow some prolonged skin to juice contact. Once the white wine grapes have been pressed, the juice is allowed to settle for a short period of time. During this phase, any solids that were in the juice after pressing will gradually settle at the bottom of the tank. The resulting juice on top of these solids is now clear and will be transferred to another tank or vessel for fermentation. The process in which the clear juice is removed from the solids is known as racking. Racking will be performed a number of times over the course of fermentation and aging. With the clear juice now free of the majority of the solid matter, the process of fermentation will be started. Red grapes are fermented with the skins and seeds in the must prior to pressing and are only pressed after the fermentation is complete. The following procedures are valid for both red and white grapes. At this point, the must is ready to be inoculated with yeast. The freeze-dried yeast is rehydrated in 37 degrees Celsius water with a yeast nutrient, typically called GoFerm. After 20 minutes, the yeast will begin to foam up or bubble, indicating that it is ready. To acclimate the yeast to the must's temperature, small amounts of the must are gradually added to the yeast slurry in 10-minute intervals, being careful to not lower the temperature of the yeast slurry by more than 10 degrees Celsius each time. Repeat this until the temperature of the yeast slurry and the must are within 10 degrees Celsius of each other. Then the yeast slurry is poured into the must. Fermentation is now started, although there may be no visible signs for about 24 hours. During this time, the yeast is rapidly reproducing and multiplying by a few hundred times. Eventually, the yeast turns its energy into converting the sugars into alcohol, carbon dioxide, which is CO2 gas, and heat. The release of the CO2 gas provides the first clues that there is an active fermentation going on. In the case of red grapes, the CO2 gas bubbles start to push the grape skins to the top of the primary fermenter, causing a cap to form. This cap needs to be periodically punched down back into the juice so that the flavors, tannins, and colors can be extracted from the skins. How often the cap is punched down is a winemaker's choice, but it is usually done a few times each day. In large-scale wineries, the cap may not be manually physically punched down. Instead, the juice is pumped over the cap, achieving the same results. The heat of the fermentation process must be managed when fermenting volumes of 50 gallons or more. Temperature profiles directly impact the aromas, flavors, and overall health of the yeast. This can sometimes be challenging for the home winemaker to manage. Things like fans, frozen jugs of water, and even small improvised cooling coils can help cool the fermenting must. Commercial wineries use those large fermentation tanks made out of stainless steel with integrated glycol-filled cooling jackets to manage the temperatures. As the fermentation progresses over a period of days, it will appear to slow down as the sugar content drops and the alcohol content rises. The winemaker will monitor the progress by checking the sugar content or specific gravity of the must using a hydrometer. There is also continuous smelling and tasting of the must to ensure that everything is progressing properly and that no off flavors are developing. During this time, additional nutrients may be added to keep the yeast population healthy. A typical fermentation will last from about 5 days to a couple of weeks. This is dependent mainly on the yeast varieties, the fermentation temperatures. However, any other factors will influence the time to a lesser degree. This brings us to the pressing stage. White grapes will have already undergone this process prior to fermentation. The timing of when the red grape must be pressed is up to the winemaker and plays a significant role in shaping the characteristics of the final wine. For lighter skinned red wines, the must is pressed before fermentation is fully complete, allowing the fermentation to finish in a secondary carboy or tank without the skins or the seeds present. For heavier tannic-rich wines, the must be left in the primary fermentation vessel for up to a few weeks after the fermentation is complete. The pressing itself is performed using a wine press. Now these can vary from the traditional basket press that everybody's seen with the wooden slats to a small bladder press to a large commercial bladder press. They all accomplish the same thing, to separate the wine from the skins and the seeds. At this point we have wine, but it will be cloudy with suspended particles, including yeast cells and grape pulp. The wine is then transferred into airtight vessels. Most home winemakers will use glass carboys, demijohns, or even small stainless steel tanks as a secondary storage container. No matter what the choice, they should be filled to the top with as little air contact as possible to prevent oxidation. Airlocks are added to allow for the release of CO2 and to accommodate expansion while preventing air from entering the vessel. SO2, which is potassium metabisulfite, is added at this stage to act as a preservative and to inhibit oxidation. After a few weeks, suspended particles will settle and form a sludge at the bottom of the secondary container. This is referred to as the lees. Again, winemaker preference prevails here. Some will leave the wine on the lees for many months, stirring it regularly. Others will rack it off right away, which is typically the most common process there. This choice affects the characteristics of the finished wine. Racking refers to the act of siphoning or pumping the wine out of one storage container and into another, leaving the lees behind. If the winemaker decides that the wine will undergo barrel aging, it is usually done after the first or second racking. There are two main types of oak used to make a barrel for wine: American oak and French oak. Each imparts a different characteristics to the wine. Barrel aging typically involves a combination of new and used barrels, with the used barrels being up to 3 years old. The amount of time that the wine stays in the barrel depends largely upon the winemaker's preference, and it can vary from a few months to a few years. While the wine is in the barrel, some water and alcohol will evaporate through the slightly porous wood. This evaporation tends to concentrate the flavors in the wine. This evaporation is referred to as the angel's share. Some winemakers are diligent about topping up the barrels each month to keep them full, and others just leave them alone. Again, this is the winemaker preference, and it impacts the characteristics of the finished wine. Now, whether the wine is barrel aged or aged in glass carboys or steel tanks, it requires an aging process prior to being bottled. Yeah, you guessed it, winemaker preference. Generally, white wines are aged for much shorter periods of time than red wines. The aging process allows the flavors to integrate, the tannins will elongate and mellow, and the aromas and flavors will develop and open up. Fining a wine is generally done at the beginning of the aging process to remove any of the suspended particles from the wine. Fining involves adding a substance to the wine that binds with the suspended particles, causing them to settle to the bottom. The wine is then racked to separate it from the sediment. Wines can either be fined, filtered, and sometimes both. It is said that wines age in bulk and mature in the bottle. This is a good segue into the next step, getting the wine ready to bottle. This is where the wine will be finished and sometimes filtered. Finishing a wine involves adding small added additions of whatever the winemaker feels might be missing from the wine, such as tannin or acid. It could also involve blending 2 or more different wines. Filtering involves pumping the wine through a series of filter pads that remove any suspended particles. Filters come in various porosities, ranging from coarse to sterile, depending on the specific requirements of the winemaker. Home winemakers do not always filter their reds, and some don't even filter their whites, as they rely on the natural fining process to clear their wines. Some wineries choose not to filter their reds, while nearly all of their white wines do undergo filtration. Now the wine is ready to be bottled. At this point, the wine has gone through many different stages, and the winemaker's choices have significantly shaped the wine's final character. However, the journey doesn't end here. Wine is a living organism. It will continue to grow and develop until it is in its prime, and then slowly begin to decline. This curve follows the same typical curve as other living things. The faster it reaches its prime, the quicker it begins to decline. So a wine that takes 10 years to reach its prime will likely stay in its prime for many years until it begins a slow decline in quality. Once a wine is bottled, it should not be consumed for at least 1 month. This period of time is needed to allow the wine to get over the shock of being bottled. If you have ever tasted a wine as you had bottled it and then opened a bottle a week later, you will know what I'm talking about. Bottle shock will present itself as a temporary harshness or bitterness in the wine. This completes the Lesson 1 lecture. The Lesson 1 practical video, which is next in our series, will cover the basic equipment that you will need to start making wine at home from kits. The link in the top right corner of the screen will take you to our course playlist that I talked about earlier. Click on it and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can find the other videos in this series easily. If you've already done this, just ignore the link and enjoy the rest of the series. Thank you for watching.